Hello and welcome to the Hey Sweet Art Project Pack Paint Along series for 2024. My annual project packs were pre-released in November last year and are available throughout 2024. They include a booklet with 10 beautiful colorful references and 10 ready-to-paint templates printed on 300 grams, 100% cotton, cold-pressed watercolor paper. Before we get started on painting our Echeveria in a tin can, I just wanted to say a quick and very big thank you to everyone who provided feedback regarding the audio in my first upload of this tutorial. I took all of that feedback on board and straight away just got to work on fixing the issue so that hopefully now, second time around, it is a much improved tutorial experience. I'm going to be starting with the tin first, working in those beautiful celadon shades and those lovely rusty reds and browns. To mix the blue of the tin color, I've just used the Daniel Smith Watercolour green and cobalt turquoise combined, and I've mixed it in a wash consistency, which basically means a fair amount of water to achieve the lightness that I'm looking for. As I paint in my mixed blue, I also just adjust the intensity as I'm working by picking up clean water straight from the water jar and painting with this directly into the page, and this just helps lighten the mixture even further where I need it lightened a little bit more. I'm also not really fussy about it being a smooth wash at all. Given the texture of the tin can, any imperfections simply add interest to my painting in this area. So yeah, not being too prescriptive, trying to follow the reference, just trying to lay in that paint as quickly as I can. While this paint is still wet, I'm also going to do a bit of a lifting technique just to lift off some of the areas where it's a little bit darker than I would like and restore some of the lighter values into this painted tin. So what I'll do is rinse off my brush, wipe it off on a paper towel, and then I'll just lift off gradually from the page. Once I finish painting in the tin with the blue mix of paint, I'm just going to let it dry and in the meantime start mixing my brown. So I'm going to mix 2 batches of colors. I'll be using a mix of just the burnt sienna for the reddish rust colors in the tin, and then I'll tweak this in a separate well by adding a bit of indigo to the burnt sienna, and this will just help create those darker values, and it sort of creates a burnt umber, very dark brown color. Just to start, I'll be using this dark value in the area above the ridge at the top of the tin. I'm painting in the foliage and the darkest shadows with the burnt sienna and indigo mix of paint. And once I finish this, I will start moving into the tin. I'm going to leave the ridges at the top of the tin and at the bottom of the tin until the very end, and just work solely on the rusty colors that are in the body of the tin. I think by now the tin in the blue should be dry. So I'm going to just intensify the burnt sienna color that I've pre-mixed to make sure that it's a nice reddy brown color. And then I am going to start washing that into the rusty sections of the tin. I'm also switching my brush to a slightly bigger brush so that I can move quickly and cover as big an area as possible. Where possible, I'm also just making sure that I don't paint over all the lighter bits of the tin. So throughout the rusty section, there are some flecks of lightness. I'm not going to be too prescriptive with following the reference in this way. I feel like this is a nice place where you can play with the wet on wet technique and create a rusty effect to your liking. It doesn't necessarily have to be identical to the tin. So as I said, this is a nice area where you can work in a bit of a wet on wet technique, and that basically means you have a wet layer of paint on the surface of your page, and then you're going to come in with contrasting colors and let it sort of bleed and bloom into the previous layer. I have also started switching to the darker color that we mixed. It's the same color that I used for the shadows just above with the indigo and the burnt sienna mixture. I've watered some of it a little bit down, and I'm using this for the darker areas in the tin. And you'll see where I want to intensify the redder areas, I'm just going in with a much stronger pigmentation of the burnt sienna. So getting like really strong contrasts and changes in that rust effect makes it look quite organic and natural. Here's where, while it's wet, I'm starting to add in some of that darker color and bringing it into my lighter sections to give it a bit of texture and interest. And I'm just letting the paints work together and do their own thing. There's very little control in that regard. I've also created a darker version of the blue tin color, and I'm going to bring that into the tin where you can clearly see there are a few darker shadows within the blues. And I'm not working pigment heavy here. I am rinsing off, wiping off my brush, and then wiping it off quite substantially, so it's almost creates a dry brush effect when I'm working this in. So always adding texture. And then in some places, like you'll see here where I touch the side where it meets the burnt sienna, it just gently crosses over into that painted border of the blue tin color and leaves more interesting texture. So you'll see as well me bringing some of the burnt sienna color into the blue as I'm painting. And again, it's all about just adding color, working in while there is a wet layer so that it can move organically. I'm not necessarily putting things in their place. Just to add contrast and try and achieve some of the more rusty textures in the tin, I'm just going back in for a second pass, bringing in some of the darks and adding in a little bit more intensity to the sort of shadow areas of the tin. Okay, I'm going to leave this here now, and we are going to start working on the Echeveria. So if you have a look at the reference and you look at the tin, you'll see that much of the same coloration is pulled through in the leaves of the Echeveria. So here I'm working predominantly with the phthalo green and just water it down a little bit. And it does have hints of that cobalt turquoise coming through as well, but a lighter version of that, and I'm going to start painting into the Echeveria leaves. My biggest tip here is for you to approach each leaf individually, and when you are doing so, making sure that they are not leaves next to each other, because otherwise each of your leaves starts bleeding into the next leaf, and then it starts looking like one big bluish green mess. As I paint in each leaf, I then bring in some of that burnt sienna mixture, and I'm just dropping that in at the tip of my Echeveria leaf, and that will just gently burst into the blue of the leaf. And I'll bring some of that burnt sienna to the outline of the leaf. It just brings in a softer edge. I am also bringing in a stronger intensity of that leaf color to plot in some of the shadows. But this is where we work in layers, and we gently paint, let things dry, move on to the next leaf while that is drying, and then we'll come back to work a second layer or a third layer eventually, to try and gently bring in more intense values. I always say this in my classes, but the technique of lifting is as much part of the process as actual painting. So often you'll see me have put in color, it would be quite dark, and then I rinse off and wipe off my brush so that it's just barely damp. And then I'll drag it through to lift some of the pigment off my page, so that it is not as strong a contrast as what initially was put onto the page. this leaf is the perfect example where I lift at the bottom of this coloration, and this is just to soften the intensity a little bit. So I'm lifting here, and it just brings in a bit of lightness back into the leaf. Sorry for the change in light that's about to happen here. You'll see somebody switched on a light behind me, and the whole temperature of the light in this video has changed to this orange, and it's just added a whole lot more shadow. But it isn't long. I do eventually realize what's happened, and I get them to switch it back off. Some of my leaves have a bit of a yellow pulling through. Obviously, if you look at the reference closely, you'll see that some of that, there's a gentle yellow fade in some of the leaves. So for that, I've just mixed a very light wash of the cadmium yellow, and I've just mixed that with a bit of my green, and then I'm using water to sort of spread the two together on the page. So that just brings in like an additional element of color to the leaves as I paint them. And again, just working very slowly in lighter washes, rather be lighter than not. And wherever I need to, I'm always lifting. So I always rinse off my brush, wipe off, and I just lift off some of the pigment where there's maybe too much liquid or there's just maybe too much pigment going on. This is where I'm starting with the more yellow version of the color, and it literally is a tiny bit of my bluey green mixture rather, and then a touch of yellow into that to bring me the more fresher color. And this is quite light, so I haven't been too generous with pigments in the mixture. And then I'll just dot in my burnt sienna here, rinse off, wipe off my brush, and then move with water to sort of blend that into position.
quite enjoyed this reference and painting this Echeveria in a tin can, purely because there's not like a lot of color going on. So the love language and the story is very unified. And so in the actual leaves of the Echeveria, you see a lot of those rusty colors starting to come through, where I need to intensify shadows. Like often, it's more a mixture of that burnt sienna into my, green mixture that I've made. So that in itself intensifies. Obviously there's a slightly stronger pigmentation in there, so just a stronger mix of those colors, but it's the perfect combination for the shadows within these little Echeveria leaves. And you'll see that with the next leaf we're about to paint. There's quite a bit of shadow coming through, and it is a leaf that is more on the burnt sienna side, but to achieve the darker shadows, I mix in that burnt sienna with a darker pigmentation of the greeny blue mixture. I hope you've noticed by now also how I never am painting two leaves that are touching, where so I finish one leaf and then move on to the next leaf, but in nowhere is it physically touching the other leaf that it would bleed into that leaf. So it's really worthwhile moving around rather than staying in a cluster of leaves and working on leaves that are next to each other, because you're going to run into the problem of paint bleeding into the next leaf. And then that's your effect of those gradient shifts and all of that are going to be lost. I think this is also very wholly applicable to the leaves where there are two sections of the leaf. So the leaf would curl and you kind of see like one part of the leaf and then the second part of the leaf that's sort of curling under. So in the leaf that I've just painted, I will paint just the one section, let that dry before I then go onto the curling down part of the leaf. So I'm establishing my shadows and all of that, which moves into the Echeveria, and then I leave it to dry. I'm now going to move on to the next leaf, and then I'll come back and I'll paint in that second part of the leaf. If I were to do it at the same time, the darker shadow section is just going to bleed into the highlights of the curly part of that leaf, and then it's going to look like one big mess. You're not going to have established those contours in your leaf. Here's where I'm going to come back to the highlights in the previous leaf that I was speaking about, where we established the shadows, left it to dry, and now we're coming in to paint the curly part that goes underneath the leaf. And it is quite a lot lighter, and because I've waited for it to dry, the previous layer of colors is not mixing into this section. It's always really cool when you get to like this kind of stage in your painting, and you've painted in most of your leaves. It all starts to make sense and everything is starting to come together. So yes, we still have this middle section to deal with, but yeah, we've established most of our leaves now, and I'm just going in intensifying some of the shadows. But I'm quite happy with where things are going, and it's a very exciting when we get to the stage near the end, and you can start to see where you need to intensify some shadows more, those final details to take it to the end. I've established most of the colors in the middle of the Echeveria, and it is while I'm waiting for this to dry that I'm just going to bring in the lips of the tin now. So everything is dry around it, and bringing that in is not going to affect what happens in the tin anymore. So I'm going in with quite a base layer. I'm establishing a stronger shadow within the tin, just to create some more contrast. And then I'm just going to bring in ever so slowly, changes in the color and in the lips. So I'll be bringing in some shadow. I'll be bringing in some, burnt sienna section, where there are sort of temperature changes in the color. But yeah, it's now about those final details and bringing in those layers into these sections of the painting. Continuing on that final detail stage, I'm just bringing in some additional texture into the tin where I think I might need, and I'm slowly going to build this out even into the blue section, just bringing in some more of that burnt sienna texture in the blues. And I'm using a very dry brush technique, so I've got the tiniest little bit of paint that I'm bringing in the color. Then I'll rinse off and wipe off my brush, and I'll move that pigment around, and it is more of a dry brushing effect than it is wet paint. It's not very wet at all. It's quite a limited amount on the brush. And then to sort of finish off, we are onto the final stages of the little Echeveria leaves at the very center of the Echeveria. So just following the reference quite closely, and I'm taking my time so as not to mix colors into one another with leaves that are next to each other. So still trying to create contrast by working around in different sections at a time. For the last few sections, I really just focus on the final sort of detail layers. And this is really fun because if you have a look at your reference, there are blemishes and marks and scratches, and it's sometimes nice just to try and capture those into the Echeveria and create a more natural looking, not so perfect plant. So I'm just going in now with those final layers. I'm going to be intensifying my shadows where I need to, and then I'm also going to be adding in those little flecks of imperfections, let's call it that, just to make the Echeveria look a little bit more natural. So we've come to the end of our painting together. Thank you so much for joining me. I really hope that you enjoyed this one, and I really look forward to seeing some of your Echeveria and Atinka paintings. Please can you share with me? I always love seeing them. So you can reach out to me on Instagram. My handle is @heysweet.art. Or you can email me hello@heysweet.art. I'd also appreciate a like on this video, and please subscribe to my channel for more content.